There's a place in the woods called Aspen Ridge because of all the populous trees which grow there. This is where we're from. We are the Popple People. Welcome to our channel. We're glad you stopped by. In this video, we'll pick up where we left off last time, assembling saw head components. First, attach the winch assembly to the rear post using two M8 by 70mm hex bolts, two M8 lock nuts, and four M8 by 30mm fender washers. A 13mm wrench and a 13mm socket were used, though two wrenches would work too. Most of the parts did come pre-assembled on the winch itself. Be sure to fully tighten all the hardware here. The winch crank did need to be attached, but the washer and nut were already in place on the winch. This required a 19mm wrench. The threaded part of the locking pin on the winch crank did need to be adjusted, so there was a small gap left between the lock pin wheel and the threaded body of the lock pin. An 18mm wrench was needed for this. Next, the winch cable needed to be unwound. Wear gloves for this. That sharp wire cable will cut you. Now the cable is ready to be threaded throughout the saw head. You'll need to look at pictures in the owner's manual for specific cable routing instructions. It's helpful to keep some tension on the cable while you're installing it. When you're winding the winch, you want to make sure it winds on the spool evenly, like you see here. For any winch, it's important that the cable doesn't get tangled to ensure smooth operation of the winch. Make sure that split ends up just before the double pulleys. To position this properly, you'll need to start with the wire cable partially wound onto the winch spool, which is why you saw the cable being wound as this process started. After that split, the longer lift cable runs to the right front post. That retainer clip was tricky. This piece will get adjusted later when the unit is leveled. After the split, the shorter lift cable will route straight down to the left front post. It's a tight squeeze to get in there, so you'll need a 17mm wrench for that bolt. It doesn't need to be super tight, but it does need to be flush with the end of the bolt. Next, we installed the lubrication tank on the front of the saw head. All the nuts and bolts were already on the tank, so that made this step a little bit easier, not having to fish for hardware. To tighten these up, a 13mm wrench and a 13mm socket were used. Before you begin inserting the copper piece of tubing, back out the set screw enough so that the copper pipe slides through easily. You'll need a 3mm hex wrench to do this. Be sure the small curvature on the end is properly aligned with the blade. Double check the picture in the manual for this. Be careful you don't over-tighten the set screw onto that copper, or it could sustain damage. Again, you'll need a 3mm hex wrench for this, which did not come in a hardware kit with the sawmill, so you'll need to have that tool. Both pieces of plastic tubing are identical, so you connect one from the blue tank fitting to the vertical fitting on the valve below. That fit was tight, so some silicone lubricant was applied before the next tube was installed. Connect the other piece of tube from the horizontal fitting on the valve through the small hole on the post sleeve to the copper piece that was just installed. That silicone sure helped. To assemble the log scale, you'll need 2 M6 by 15mm hex bolts, 2 M6 lock nuts, and 2 M6 flat washers. First, bolt the scale support in place using a 10mm wrench and socket. Don't tighten these too much though, because they'll need to be adjusted later. Next, affix the front and rear indicator arrow brackets with the threaded knob. Slap on the magnetic scales, and you can store the unused one on the back side. At this point, check the positioning and make sure the log scale doesn't bind before you tighten the lower 2 bolts. Play around with it and adjust it slightly if anything binds while moving the saw head up or down. If you have questions, email us at thepopple people, all one word, @gmail.com. Stay tuned for our next video where we'll finish assembling the saw head components. We wanted to make sure everything was proper, so we used the small magnetic level that attached right to the log scale support. We needed 18 and 19mm wrenches to adjust it to level. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more straight-to-the-point videos about our journey with this sawmill, please consider subscribing. That way, you can be a Popple People too. We'll catch you next time. Bye.